Good morning, folks, and welcome back to another episode of the Daily Crypto Byte. Today is Monday, April 11th, and we've had quite a pullback here in the markets. CJ and I have been at Bitcoin Miami 2022, enjoying ourselves, talking with some like-minded crypto traders. So plenty to discuss today, mostly with the traditional equity markets. So we'll get to that and a whole lot more before we get started. CJ, how are you doing today, my friend?
Doing well, Monty. It's funny you say like-minded individuals. There's a lot of interesting characters there, to say the least. A lot of very strong opinions, so that's always entertaining. But it was great to see some of the folks in the industry and really how a lot of companies and organizations have blossomed over the last year or two. But with that being said, we got some really interesting market price action to discuss because there's a lot of fear. Also, really interesting article published by the former CEO of BitMEX, Arthur Hayes, called The Q Trap. Basically talks a lot about how the Qs, NASDAQ, and equities have really been pulling down crypto and may continue to do so. So we'll get into that a little bit later in the show. But Monty, how you doing? Anything you'd like to start off with?
Doing well, CJ, doing well. I think where we should start today is with the traditional equity markets, because that article that you shared with Arthur Hayes, he talks a lot about the correlation with the NASDAQ and the Qs. And I think that's very evident this morning as both of those, major traditional indexes both gapped down this morning pretty significantly. And as a result, crypto's coming with it. So I feel like that's a good starting point, taking a look at where we're at from a traditional equity perspective. So you want to dive into some charts there?
Yep, pulling them up right now. Starting with the SPX. Let's take some moving averages off. I mean, yeah, massive gap down, as you've seen once again, Monty. Was nice to see this gap fill, I guess, from the bearish perspective, because that shows, you've had that, and then you've instantly had a rejection the following day. Now, being said, we are kind of going right back into the midpoint of this range. So we'll see if we get a bounce from this particular level, roughly the 4,400 level, which held as pretty good resistance back in September of 21. But yeah, not looking particularly strong. I think one of the only hopes for the bulls is if we fall into something like this, where if the trend actually does rebound and we are able to hold this level from this channel right here from roughly current price, say we consolidate above that level and find some support, perhaps this then becomes an inverse head and shoulders pattern, which could then at least lead to some moderate to bullish price action. That's kind of the optimistic case. As of now, this support is not looking tremendously strong. And so ideally what you don't want to see is, another like surrendering of that level, perhaps a back test, failure swing to the potential that we do revisit those lows. So this is a level not only you'll see on the NASDAQ, but also for Bitcoin today is very, very crucial for the trend, because while this was one of the most powerful up thrusts that we've seen in the equity market history off of a low, it still needs to hold and form that higher low. And Monty, we were talking last week, you said it very succinctly, and I thought you made a good point when you said, after having one of the most powerful thrusts off the lows in SPX and NASDAQ history, you're going to see a good amount of profit taking. There still is a lot of doubt in this market and a lot of strength for the bearish thesis. So just a couple plans there and a couple outlooks. Now, let's take a look at Bitcoin and how it's been performing, because, I have said we're touching very critical levels, and we'll go into those as well. Starting with the weekly chart, though, because we do have a pretty significant development on the weekly, I first want to just talk about momentum and where the trend has been heading. So we've talked about these moving averages and the importance of them throughout the previous trends. And, we're looking for kind of a bounce off of this previous support level of the roughly, all-time highs. But we lost this level, and we're looking for potential resistance, potential support, whatever this level is going to become. It may dictate the future momentum of the trend. But as of now, we've lost that bullish channel. It's appearing to be just a fake out at the current point in time, unless we can hold this very critical 41K level. If we lose that, ideally, I think there's a stronger case that you may test some of these lows or even create kind of a higher low at maybe 37 or 38K in the interim. But after looking at momentum and kind of longer term trend, let's take a look at daily charts and specifically where we are in relation to how far we've come. So we're back into the ascending triangle, and I do want to add some of these moving averages because they do tell a good story of kind of how the trend has behaved where it has. So last week, following the breakout of the ascending triangle, 200 period moving average or 200-day moving average acted as some really strong resistance and sent price down. It was not able to find any type of support at the 20 smoothed, which has kind of been a common theme as of late. But it's not really that great to see it turning over. I think if the trend is to find support, it has to today or at least close to this 40,000 or 41,000 level, because not only is it in confluence with the 200-day or the 100-day moving average, you also have this upward sloping trend line left over from the ascending triangle, and then when you go back to the run that we had in the summer and where that profit taking actually occurred, you can look in there for specifically where we found support. So where did we find support? It was like right here. And that is the current level that we are at right now. So if there was ever a time to be a buyer or to get a bounce for the bullish thesis for Bitcoin to maintain its current posture, today would be the day, or at least this level that we're currently floating in. So basically, that's a longer form technical analysis for today. Interested to get into a lot of the other stuff. We haven't even really mentioned ETH too, but ETH BTC and ETH has actually still been holding up quite well despite the negative price action. But any thoughts, Monty? Before we
Yeah, I
head
got
to
a few thoughts.
the Q
Just
trap.
it is a trap, like Admiral Akbar says, and I think Arthur Hayes made some really good points in that article. I just want to quickly go over a few of those, and then just take a look at Bitcoin and ETH, CJ, because I think you made some great points about how we're coming up on some very critical levels today. So first and foremost with Bitcoin here, like you said, CJ, we have a confluence of support levels at 40K from many different directions, and if we look at what we're seeing on the hourly chart. We are seeing significant supply absorption here. We're seeing buyers step in at this level, evident from this strong wick here, whether it be, algorithmic, buying here or actual people willing to step in and take risk. This is something that we often see following, a sharp sell-off. And whenever we see these large upticks in volume, they're followed typically by a brief period of consolidation. You can see that here, we sold off, saw some strong supply absorption, strong volume at the 44K level that allowed us to consolidate for about 2 days here before going lower, and again seeing strong supply absorption on that move down. And now we're doing it again here. So I am anticipating some consolidation above the 40K level. I don't think it'll be a strong break, and I'm just basing that on this strong volume here, strong wick of supply absorption, and really you could kind of translate the same thing to ETH here, because we are seeing very similar signs of supply absorption at the critical 3K level. Strong uptick in volume, wick indicative of buyers stepping in. And again, we've seen the same sort of thing where as it pulls back, here it hit the TD9. This is something we talked about in the trade insight on some very strong volume, and that allowed it to consolidate in this range for basically all weekend. And it wasn't until we had another large capitulation event with the Qs and NASDAQ gapping down this morning that the sell pressure was finally enough to break out of that range. So I am anticipating a brief period of consolidation here now that we're kind of retesting the lows or retesting some highly critical levels in both Bitcoin and ETH. But getting to that Arthur Hayes article, CJ, I think it's a great read. I highly recommend you to check out the entire thing. But one thing in particular that he mentions at the end that I think is very poignant and basically sums up the feeling of being correlated with the Qs and the NASDAQ. He says, there are many crypto market pundits who believe the worst is over. I believe they ignore the inconvenient truth that the crypto capital markets are currently just a 24/7 SPOOs and Qs indicator and do not trade on fundamentals of being peer-to-peer, decentralized, censorship-resistant digital networks designed for the transfer of money. And that's been entirely evident. He makes some great points. over the last 3 months, we've seen upwards of a 60% correlation between the Qs and Bitcoin. That's not something you want to see, especially when there's, fears of rate hikes, fears of a recession in the next year. You want to see Bitcoin showing strength independent of traditional equity markets. And that's just unfortunately not what we're seeing right now. And it was interesting because we were at this conference, and so much of the narrative right now is driven by, future utility, that peer-to-peer narrative, the decentralized narrative. But really, right now, what we're seeing is Bitcoin is trading in tandem with the Qs. And that's something that not a lot of people were talking about over the weekend, something that a lot of people kind of choose to, I think, willfully ignore here. But I think it's very important to keep in mind that a significant pullback in the Qs will certainly have an effect on Bitcoin. And we're already seeing that this morning. So I think you need to be nimble this week. Keep your eyes on traditional equity markets, and also keep an eye on those critical levels that we just highlighted for both Bitcoin and ETH.
Yeah, and if there's short-term price movements, especially on the downside, never a bad move to hedge some of the longs. Interesting question here. I like this. Is Bitcoin a currency or an asset? I mean, if something is valued, it could technically be exchanged. If you could transact Tesla stock or Apple stock or anything of that sort, it just depends on who wants to accept it and whether it's declared as legal tender or not. The fact that you can pay, the fact that you can pay taxes with Bitcoin in certain jurisdictions in the United States, that makes it legal tender. But does that make it money in the sense that, do people still want to spend it or use it as a medium of exchange? So, I think it's a rather ambiguous definition, and it depends on the person. I think what you're going to see over the next 15 to 20 years is people having less of an obligation to save in their national currency, more a driven or a connection to save with like a global type system. For instance, like Bitcoin, whether that be people who have the same kind of mentality, whether that be around the 21 million coin supply. But anyways, let's get back to the correlation on the Qs. Monty, nice job of laying out the article shared by Arthur Hayes. I just wanted to show a little bit of charts or a few charts of these NASDAQ correlations because they are quite staggering. This one right here is the Bitcoin versus NDX over a 90-day correlation. And so you can see this just really, really skyrocketing and continually getting stronger in virtually each one of these that you look at. So, in order for Bitcoin to go up, it seems we're going to need the Qs and a little bit more risk-on mentality to emerge back into the markets. But yeah, Monty, anything else you'd like to end with before we start the Doge of the day?
I think just last point, to Vincent's question about, is Bitcoin a currency or an asset? I think right now, we're seeing it act more like an asset. That correlation with the NASDAQ and the Qs, people are still trading it. It is still an emerging asset. People are speculating on its future value, and that makes it behave a little bit more like an asset. But I'd say at its core, Bitcoin is more of a currency, of a true store of value. And, eventually that narrative will take hold, and I think it will, become less volatile and act almost kind of boring like gold. But for the time being, it's still a very volatile asset. People are trading it like it's an emerging tech stock because, it still is, highly speculative. So it is a nice blend of both. And really, that's the great thing about Bitcoin. It can be whatever you want it to be. So, yeah.
One thing I will say, though, as we wrap up here, is that because Bitcoin is, I think you can say now that Bitcoin is coming out of the speculative era, since it is so correlated with NASDAQ and equity markets, because that shows the same people who believe in ARK or the same people who choose to buy and sell ARK or the Qs or those tech stocks are starting to have massive overlap. Basically, are the same individuals who are trading Bitcoin and crypto right now, and that lumped in. It's being lumped in with macro. So it is being taken seriously on the world stage, but still it's not seemingly going to escape that correlation anytime soon. But regardless, thank you guys for watching. We'll be doing our members only Doge of the day just after this, where we talk about a couple different trade setups we're thinking about. If you'd like to get access to that or learn more about it, you can check it out in the link in the description below. But we really appreciate it, guys. Hope you have a wonderful week in the world, wherever you're at, and we'll see you next time.